The mind is always going to divert the attention in order to stay away from you looking at it. And that will also come in the form of like fear of like facing yourself, yeah, facing the mind. The thing is you're not the self. So when you come to face it, when you come to observe it, when you come to look at it, in order to see what's going on, which is contributing to your unhappiness or your perceived unhappiness, you're not it. So you're looking at it from what you are. See, the issue is that we live from it, so that when the uh, when there's discomfort, then and we want to get out of that discomfort, we don't want to look at the source of discomfort, which is us and what we're giving power to, right? So the reason we don't want to look at it is because we're living as the discomfort. We're living as the self. We're living um, as the problem maker, let's say. So there needs to be an understanding, or at least a little bit of faith put in the fact that we're not that, that we're observing that, that we're listening to that. Then we can really start to honestly look at the root of the issue, not being the external situations, not even really being the thought patterns themselves, but being to who they arise to, meaning the ownership of the thought patterns. Because when I sit in beingness, I know I don't own the thought patterns. They dissipate really quickly. It's not something incessant. It's not. There's a source. There's a fuel to the thought pattern, which I am giving it by what Banki, or I think you pronounce it Banki, the Zen master Banki would say self-cherishing. Yeah. So we cherish the thought process. We cherish the body, and in doing that, we reify that we are that. But also we feed the fire. We feed the fire of the thought process, so that the thought process then develops. It gets really fast. We get caught in it, and then beingness, or what we are, seems to be not there. Yeah, it seems like we're way out of contact, or we've lost contact with God, or I've done something to disconnect me with God. Oh, so then I want out of the discomfort. Yeah, but because I'm entangled with the mind, I'm trying to get out of the discomfort as the mind. And the mind is never going to look at the mind being the source of the issue. It's always going to just keep looking around. And the mind wants to get stuff because it wants gratification for doing stuff. So the mind is constantly going, oh, I'm going to meditate more. I'm going to read more books. I'm going to get more information. Yeah, but it's never going to turn on itself and look at its own part to play. Its part to play being that it's playing God. It's trying to control the circumstance. So one of the tricks that it's going to play is that it's going to look at all of these other things so that you don't look at it. And then it'll keep you in that cycle of suffering, of the thought process and entangling and feeding it and living from it, which means I see separately. Yeah. And because I see separately, not only am I now living in great discomfort, but pretty much everybody around me is also living in great discomfort. Alcoholism, then, is just I'm trying to get out of the discomfort, right? It's like that's just another tactic, but it's not going to work because I'm not looking at the source of the discomfort, which is the sense of self being an individual being. Mm-hmm. The real hook on that, though, is that you're not doing that. You're unchanged as beingness, but it's the mind that's not showing up because the mind isn't going to look at the mind. So there's just we have to have this knowing, because it's closer to us. What we are is closer to us than the mind. Actually, it's so close that we're it. So the mind comes after it. Yeah, which means I can view the mind from what I am. If you couldn't view the mind from what you were, you wouldn't know that you were in discomfort, because you would be discomfort. But you're not discomfort. You're the knowing of discomfort. Yes? So we get those glimpses all the time. It's happening all the time. What you are is never not here. But we get tied into the discomfort. We claim the discomfort as our discomfort. We claim ourselves as the self in the thought process, which reifies the discomfort because we're feeding the thought process because we think we are the thought process. So then the thought process tells us, well, don't go look at the source of the issue, which is the sense of self, which is reifying the thought process. You see, once you're in the cycle and you're taking ownership of the cycle is not going to break itself. You know, the mind that created the problem is not going to get out of the problem. Self can't get out of self. Yeah. So Huang Po says the perceived is not or what is perceived is not the perceiver. Mm-hmm. So what we're perceiving as the thought process, we're taking to be the perceiver. We're taking the thought process to suggest that there's a thinker of the thought process. And then we're claiming the thinkerness, which means we're back in the perceived. So when we're in that thought process, then the thought process, like I said, doesn't want to look at the thought process. It's just not going to do it. It doesn't want to be caught, let's say. Yeah, it wants to maintain that control and it wants to reify its old patterns and its projections to the future, which are based on the old patterns. So it's not going to show up to look at itself. It's going to keep outsourcing that. You're going to heal me. This book is going to heal me. This retreat's going to heal me. Ooh, ooh, ooh. The eyes of self look out these eyes in the head and they look outward. You're going to do it. This is going to help me. I'm going to get better this way and I'm going to feel better this way. But it's not reviewing the source of the suffering, which is that sense of self, which lives off of the thought process. So we have to see that the thought process then is a mechanism which is happening after our beingness. Mm-hmm. And then when the thought process plays its usual tricks of don't show up, yeah, you're not worthy of that. That's a thought process. In my case, that's a thought process based on past information, which is not happening right now. And that thought process likes to reify itself randomly. Randomly, or something happens in my life which might suggest that possibly that is attracted to something that happened when I was 7. And because that same thought process happened when I'm 7, I'm going to have that thought process now. Now, that thought process, as I said, is not going to look at itself. So as long as I'm living in that thought process, I'm not going to look at the root of the issue. The thought process is going to say, I want to get out of the thought process. But the thought process can only see externally. It's only going to look separately. So it's going to keep going. More books. I've done that. Yeah. More meditation. I've done that. More yoga. I've done that. Yet the root of suffering is not rooted. Those things are useful tools to get a little bit of knowledge. Yeah. And to settle down the mind, calm the body. But they are tools. Yeah, it's like when a carpenter takes his tools to work. When he goes home after work, he leaves the tools in the truck. So once we use the tools, we use them as the vessel to do the job. Yeah. But they are not the job. They're boats that take us towards the other shore. But the other thing is that the mind, the sense of self, gets attached to the vessels. It gets attached to the tools. And it takes now that identity. Right. So I was a suffering alcoholic, and now I'm going to be a meditator, and that's going to solve my issues. But I'm not looking at the root of the issue. So now I'm living as a meditator who's now suffering as a meditator. The meditation does help calm some things down, but it doesn't uproot the root, the baseline of the issue. Yeah, because now I'm meditating as a me, as a solid, separate thing, which I'm not. I'm not. So it's really important to see that Because if we're constantly living from the view of the thought pattern as the thought pattern, we're never going to look at the thought pattern. Addiction is really beautiful because the thought pattern gets proven so many times as a failing thought pattern that eventually we just look at it if we want out of the addictive pattern. Yes, but most of us uh, who don't have the that kind of level of addiction, like someone like myself has been through, yeah, the thought patterns aren't completely destabilizing. You know, they're not driving maybe you to do really obscene things like a alcoholic, like thought patterns of an alcoholic. Then going to booze are going to make me do. The booze is going to make me act very, really wild. Yeah. Whereas a lot of us might just live in discomfort, which ranges from a little bit to a ton. But in the contemporary society, especially in the West, we have so many things that we can do to medicate medicate that suffering um, temporarily. And a lot of us have enough money and things that we can keep temporarily medicating, but we're not getting the freedom. We're not getting the release from discomfort that we're looking for. We're not getting the relief. So what happens is we just keep spending resources on temporary fixing. Temporary fixing, temporary. It just keeps on going. Yeah. We use the tools. The tools feel good, but the tools often feel good because we're just gratifying and reifying our sense of individuality. When really it's the sense of self that is the root of the thought patterns that are making life uncomfortable. So the temporary fixes are simply they feel good in a way, but they're still temporary fixes. Mm-hmm. The same way alcohol is a temporary fix, cocaine is a temporary fix, heroin, sex, temporary. It's always going to wear off. I don't want wear off relief. Wear off relief is not the game. That's not what I'm looking for. Yeah. I spent a long time in wear off relief, and it gets old quick, and then you need more. You need more of it. I think what's really important is that we see the thought pattern when it's telling us not to look at the source of the suffering. You see it and you see it as not you. That means you can be free from it. It means you can be honest about it. Yeah. That's when I find I really start showing up. And I show up more to yoga practice. I show up more to meditation. Because those vessels, you come to understand that they are boats that settle the mind and settle the body. So that I can then really see the reality of what's happening. I can settle the mind so that I can see my beingness or know my beingness. Yeah. You're never not beingness, but when you're entangled with the mind, it seems like you're not. So the vessels settle that movement of thought, that movement of identification, so that you can sit back in the beingness. And then we can start to be really, really honest about what I'm not, the thought patterns, where they're coming from, why they keep happening. Most importantly, that they're not me. But because they're not me, they soften off. A lot of them dissipate. And the ones that don't dissipate, that seem to keep repeating, I can start being really honest about because they're not me. That's when I feel like real psychological and physiological. That's when I felt the most uh, shift as far as relief is concerned, as far as understanding and willingness to show up in order to do that. Because as the head, I'm not really going to show up. I'm going to go to try to get gratification for the thought process, for the self. But I know after all these years that is not going to get, that's not going to do the job of lasting relief.